So these are some of the diseases I'm probably going to touch on today. So let's start with epizootic hemorrhagic disease. Epizootic hemorrhagic disease used to be called the most significant disease of white-tailed deer, or of deer in general in North America. And that unfortunately is no longer true. Chronic wasting disease is now the most significant disease. But epizootic disease is still the most significant viral disease. So epizootic hemorrhagic disease is caused by a virus. And it can kill deer very quickly, especially in the Northeast where we don't typically have this disease. And you notice this deer is near the water. These carcasses, these mortalities from epizootic hemorrhagic disease are often found in or near water. And they're often found sometimes in groups of 3, 4, and 5. So this virus has the ability to come in and kill a lot of deer in a small area in a very short amount of time. The vector is a small biting midge, right? So the deer don't pass it nose to nose. They don't give it to each other. But this infected midge bites them, and then another midge bites that, and then it goes by these midge bites. Down south they call them no-see-ums, but they're pretty small, but you can see them.
Down in the significant mortality from that this year?
Yeah, and I'll talk about that a little bit in a second, Chris. But we did have pretty good mortality this year. This was our biggest year yet. Down in the southern states, this disease has been there for many years. And the deer down there have developed a resistance to it, almost an immunity. So some of them get sick, some of them don't get sick, some of them get a little sick but they don't die. The does seem to be able to pass some of that immunity on to the fawns. So they don't get big die-offs like we do up here in the north. But we didn't used to see this disease up in the north. And in 2007, we had our first outbreak up here in New York. And actually it was around the lab, and it was in Albany County, and it was in Rensselaer County around Castleton, where we had cases that we were able to identify. And we think we lost about 50 deer in that die-off.
They also call that blue tongue?
Yeah, so there's a couple viruses that can cause this disease. So there's epizootic hemorrhagic disease virus, and there's several strains of that, and there's a couple strains of blue tongue virus, which can also cause it. So they're very similar viruses, and they cause a very similar disease. In order to determine which one it is, you need to take some samples and send it to the lab and serotype it. Yeah. So in 2007, we had the initial outbreak, and then we didn't have any outbreak for a while. And I think in 2011, we had an outbreak in Ulster County. Highway crews were just picking up roadkills, and they were thinking these aren't roadkills. So they sent them up, and it was epizootic hemorrhagic disease. And they figured, Region 3 staff think they lost about 100 deer in the Ulster County outbreak. So when you open these deer up, it's a hemorrhagic virus, it's a hemorrhagic disease. So what happens is the virus causes the blood vessel walls to leak, and then they get just hemorrhage anywhere. So it's kind of like Ebola virus for deer. And you can open them up, and there could just be these hemorrhages everywhere that aren't really associated with any kind of trauma. This shot up here, this is what they see with the more chronic cases where it doesn't kill them right away. And we weren't expecting to see too much of this in New York because our deer are so naive to this. So most of the ones we think that get infected, they die in short order. So there's like a 5 to 10 day incubation period after they get bit. And then once they start showing signs, they're dead 24 to 36 hours after that. They go downhill pretty quick. The carcasses seem to really bloat up really quickly too because they get really feverish. The body temperature is elevated. And that's why we think that they're often found near water, because they're going to the water trying to cool down a little bit. And their body temperature's already got a head start being high, so we think that's why they kind of bloat up and decompose so much faster than regular like a roadkill deer would.
Is there a specific time of the year when we're seeing that?
Yeah, there used to be. So we used to see it late September, October. And so in 2020, 2 years ago, we had an outbreak in the lower Hudson Valley, Dutchess County, Putnam County, down in that area. And actually it came all the way up to just touch southern Albany County. And that was a much larger outbreak. We think we lost about 1,500 deer in that outbreak, all told. And then I thought, well, we're gonna have another 5-10 years where we won't have to worry about this, because that's how it was working. The conventional wisdom was that the infected midges were blowing up from the south on weather events, and that's how they got into New York. So that's how we thought things were working. And it seemed to work, you know, they could kind of tie it to storm events. But then last year, in July, staff in Region 3 said, hey, we got a couple dead deer down here that look like they're EHD. And I said, well, it's July, it's probably not, plus we got 5 years rest. We're not gonna have to worry about it for 5 years. Send them up, and they sent them up, and I opened up the first one, and I said, oh, this looks like EHD. And I opened up the second one, and so we had the first cases in the country in New York in July, in the same area where we had the outbreak the previous year, which suggests that the midge somehow overwintered in New York because it was also the same strain that we had the year before. That was strain 6. So we don't know for sure if that's what happened, but that's certainly something that we're considering.
The picture of the hoofs, what was that depicting exactly?
So that's showing, let me see if we're, so that's showing a growth interruption. So when they have the virus, and if they don't die and they survive, while they have the virus, the hoofs stop growing, so they have this interruption pattern.
Oh, okay.
And then, and once they kind of recover from the virus, then it grows again. And this is kind of mild. We had some cases this year where the hooves were just sloughed right off, and they were broken off, and they looked pretty gnarly. And so we were thinking the previous year, we had a couple cases like this, and we tried to test them to see if it was EHD, and we couldn't get a good test on it, so we couldn't confirm it. But this year we saw a couple cases, and we were able to actually get the virus like right out of the hoof. So we were able to confirm that that's what it is. So some of our deer actually survived, and they were taken during the hunting season. That's how we got our hands on them, because the hunter said, hey, there's something wrong with it. What's wrong with this deer's hoof? So eventually what would happen if we saw cases back to back every year, it would kind of be like it would be down south. You know, the deer with resistance would survive and reproduce, and the deer that died would die and they wouldn't reproduce. The good thing about epizootic hemorrhagic disease, if there is a good thing, is, you know, you get these outbreaks that can kill, we think we lost 2,500, 2,600 deer last year, this past season. If it doesn't come back the next year, those deer will build back up in like 2 or 3 years. They'll be right back up at the same levels that they were before. So that's the good thing.
Hopefully with that immunity, or partial immunity, do that.
Yeah, some of them probably would have partial immunity, the ones that survived, yeah. But you know, I'm not sure how long that partial immunity lasts. So don't quote me on that. There might be a situation where that kind of peters out if they're not challenged over a number of years. So this map was put together by the Southern Cooperative Wildlife Disease Survey, and it shows the areas where we had, this was this past year's cases. So you can see these blue ones. This is epizootic hemorrhagic disease virus 6, where we had outbreaks initially. But then we also had outbreaks on Long Island and up along the eastern shore of Lake Ontario, up in Region 6, that were a different strain. They were strain 2. And then there's one here where they couldn't determine the strain, and that one, actually, we had a report in Washington County, but staff said they were on the other side of the river in Vermont, and they couldn't go over to Vermont with the truck to get them. So we called Vermont, Fish and Game, and they grabbed one, sent the liver into our lab, so we were able to document that case there as well. So down here, they don't have, you know, they have cases almost every year. It doesn't really kill a lot of deer, but up here in the north, it can really wipe out a good number of deer. And these triangles are actually blue tongue virus, like you were talking about earlier. So we didn't see any blue tongue virus here, but they had some cases out in the Midwest, West, and then down south in Florida. This is what the picture is in New York. So we also, as part of our database, we set up this system where people could report online, and when people called in, we'd have staff put them in this online database. So this shows where the dark purple are where we had most cases. That's like 100 to 500 cases in those purple areas. We had 2,100, a little over 2,100. And the main bulk of it was still in September, but we did have a pretty good head start before things really took off. So wrap up on epizootic hemorrhagic disease. There's no vaccine, there's no treatment. This is really a problem for people that have captive deer, because this could come in and wipe out like all your deer. There's been folks that have been working on a vaccine. Last I heard was that it really wasn't very effective at all. So there's really no vaccine or treatment available for this. It's not enzootic, it's not endemic, that word should be endemic. It's not endemic in the Northeast yet, but it might be. We'll see what happens next year. You know, if we have cases every year, which would be unfortunate. Hopefully that doesn't happen. There's several different serotypes. There doesn't seem to be any obvious pattern currently to outbreaks in the Northeast. Domestic cattle can be infected, although it doesn't really seem to affect them that much. The farmer might notice that his milk production is off. And then we talked about that.
So,
And
Kevin, if a dairy farmer notices production was off, could they
he
work
could,
with
he,
Ag and Markets?
he could call his Ag and Markets vet,
And they would,
and his Ag and Markets vet should know that there's the EHD virus, because we communicate with those guys, so they know.
They should alert you that there may be a huge virus in that area.
I like to think so. Yes, yeah, that's the way the system is.
It's a governmental department, you never know.
Right. So that may or may not, that should happen. Yeah, they would let us know. We have a really close relationship. So yeah, they'd call us and say, hey, we're seeing blue tongue virus in cattle, or we're seeing it's called EHD.
but the dairyman would see that and say, light might go off. And
Yeah, it might. Yeah, and then they would test the cows, and then here.